Welcome and thank you for being here. I'm Kimberly Hokanson, Director of Annual Membership Programs and Operations at the MFA. We are delighted that so many members could join us for tonight's lecture. We appreciate your support and your participation in the MFA's virtual member lecture series. This program is coming to you from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Founded in 1870, the MFA stands on a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different Algonquin nations, including the Massachusetts. As a museum, we acknowledge the long histories of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. We can all learn more about the Massachusetts people who continue to be the stewards of this land by visiting massachusettstribe.org. Before I introduce our speakers, a few logistical notes. A transcript and closed captions for this program are available during the program. To enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed caption, and then click on Show Subtitle to start displaying captions. During the presentation, please use Zoom's Q&A function to ask questions and share comments. Please note this lecture is being recorded and will be available through the MFA website for members to view early in the new year. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Courtney Harris joined the MFA in 2014 as a Curatorial Research Fellow and was promoted to her current position as Assistant Curator of Decorative Arts and Sculpture in 2021. She holds degrees from Johns Hopkins University and the Courtauld Institute of Art at the University of London. Luisa Respondek joined the MFA in 2022 as an exhibition designer. A graduate of the University of Cambridge, she holds her Master of Architecture degree from Harvard University. Courtney and Luisa, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having us, Kimberly, and thank you to colleagues Clover and Randy for getting us all set up with this webinar. Luisa and I are so excited to take you through Tiny Treasures, the Magic of Miniatures. I'll let Luisa say hello briefly, and then we'll get started.
Hello, yes, thank you all so much. This is going to be really exciting.
Great. So let's get started. This exhibition has been in the works for a really long time. It's been on my mind for over 7 years. So it is such a delight to finally have it on view in the RAB Gallery and to be able to share it with visitors, both virtually and in person. But really the exhibition at its concept is very, very simple. Tiny Treasures explores miniaturization in art. And simply defined, a miniature is an object that's smaller than its parent object. Compare a silver tankard for a doll's house at 1 inch tall to a full-size example at 6 inches tall. And I'm showing you these two images to start off with because we're looking at this on Zoom, and immediately we can see that by looking at things in different scales, we can compare them to each other and learn something about different scales of objects and the way they relate to each other. So these are two vases, both by the same artist, Auguste Delahirche, a French art potter, active in the late 19th, early 20th century. But as you can see, when I go to the next slide, some of them are miniature. They're only just about 1 inch tall. And these were some objects that came to light through the planning of this exhibition process. They were actually test samples for him that he would make to practice how his glazes would work, and then they would inform his artistic practice as he made his full-scale examples. They're each individually signed with his initials and a little number on the underside, so he clearly thought of them as a really important part of his practice as an artist. And for me, these are in the exhibition, they're central to the display and they're on the cover of the catalog. They're my touchstone objects that I always come back to when I think about miniatures and their parent objects. Just to give you a quick rundown, there are about 100 objects in the exhibition ranging from 700 BC to 2021. There are about 65 three-dimensional works and 35 two-dimensional works, which includes works on paper and paintings. And as Kimberly said, I'm a decorative arts person, so many of the works are from the European Decorative Arts collection, but It includes works from nearly every curatorial department in the exhibition. And that's something that's been so fun, is to bring objects from different parts of the collection and put them into cases beautifully designed by Louisa that give them their moment in the sun. So that's really one of the best things about the exhibition. Almost everything is from our own collection. There are a few private collection loans and one institutional loan from the Art Gallery of Ontario that we'll look at together. And really what this exhibition is trying to help visitors see is that the uncanny scale of miniatures, particularly as they relate to us, can sometimes be a little unsettling or uncanny, but they're also really joyful as well. The exhibition has 6 groupings. These are the thematic groupings. The gallery that it's in, the RAB gallery, has 2 entrances. Louisa will talk about the challenges and opportunities of that a little bit later. But the 2 central ones, What Makes a Miniature and Small Size, Big Style, act as kind of the introductory sections. But we hope that visitors will experience it in any order. It's a kind of choose your own adventure exhibition. The other themes, which we'll go through in more depth after Louisa's design review, but magic, mystery, and memory looks at objects that have importance for someone, maybe a religious reason or because of grief. People and Animals is playful and fun. It has some very adorable animals. And then miniatures at home and miniatures at in the world, those sections relate to each other. Miniatures for our interior spaces and miniatures for our exterior spaces. So we'll come back to those themes a little bit later, but Louisa will talk you through her design vision for the exhibition.
And the thematic groupings are really kind of key to the whole design. I mean, starting with kind of these 100 objects, the biggest challenge, I mean, there's really a lot of objects. The biggest challenge really was to scale the visitor down to the size of the object so that the objects wouldn't get lost within a large space. And so we went through a lot of different kind of design iterations at the beginning to try and break down the space into smaller sizes so that you could scale the visitor down to the object. And we pretty quickly settled on this design here with this kind of thematic groupings. And the concept here really is rooms within rooms within rooms. So you start with a size, the largest room, which is the gallery space, RAB gallery. And then you come to the next scale down, which is rooms within a room. So that's the thematic groupings that we were looking at earlier. And then on top of that is the other layer of the rooms within a room, where the cases are all individually sized to the objects themselves or their groupings, and really form a room for the objects in themselves. And there are 48 cases in this show that are all kind of sized to and they're all different. They're all sized to the objects to create these rooms within rooms within rooms. And it all comes together like this. And so in plan, you can see how it looks here with the thematic groupings. You can see already here in these walls how all the cases are different depths, different widths, different sizes, completely sized to kind of the groupings of the objects. And you can also start to see how the walls are arranged within the space to help navigate people through this space. And so kind of upon entry, as Courtney mentioned earlier, there are these 2 entrances, and it's really 50-50 where people enter from. And so we have the 2 introductory spaces here, but we also didn't want people to just accidentally pass through the whole space. And so here we have these 2 L-shaped walls that help to direct flow of traffic through the rest of the space. On the right, we have miniatures at home and miniatures in the world, which is kind of like an interior-exterior relation. And so those open up to each other to create that relationship. And then on the left, we also wanted people to just flow through those spaces as well, and to create these different relations through the layout of these walls. Within each room, you then have these L-shaped walls that then hold the cases for the objects. They're all different sizes. And one of the key aspects really that we wanted to also play with the objects a little bit, so that we kind of, within these rooms, we had individual cutouts. So each room really does have at least one cutout within the space. And it allows you to kind of reframe the object from different perspectives. So from one side, you might see an object in relation to another and kind of in a larger room, but then from a different side, like here, you see the object in a totally different scale and you experience it completely differently. And so kind of in some of the rooms, you can see here you have the little duck from both sides in relation to these paintings, or kind of from the back. Then you have here this grouping of objects through which you can even see the window of the other space. So the spaces within themselves also relate to each other a little bit. And the same in the other direction, you can see the green space here a little bit more. And so this is how it all comes together with the rooms in this space, and well, the rooms within the rooms within the room, how they all come together. And this is it in real life with all the rooms.
Great, thanks, Louisa. One of the things when we were talking about the objects and the design was that we really wanted the space to feel quite joyful. There are a lot of walls in it, so in some ways it's a little disorienting, but we wanted it to have a really, really playful and joyful feeling. So when we sat down for the first time to look at paint colors, we both said instantly pastels. And we were on the same page the whole way through. And so we picked these really vibrant colors, one for each of the themes, and then each of the objects within those themes are the cases, and all of the labels match into that too, which is one of the things I really love about the design.
And
oh yeah, go ahead, Louisa.
And they really kind of provide an interesting backdrop to each of the objects, because each object, all the objects come from such different time periods. And so the colors kind of don't necessarily relate to a certain time period and allow each object to shine in their moment.
Perfect. So let's go through the 6 sections together. This one is the one that I think of as the first section. It's the one that I think most visitors will encounter first. It's called What Makes a Miniature? And for me, working with European decorative arts, I don't always have the chance to know much about the artists who made the works that I work with. But in this case, because it's an exhibition that crosses time, culture, place, media, I get to step outside my own part of the collection and work with objects that have living artists in some cases. And so in this place, we can really use artists' own words and artists' own intentions, understand exactly why they choose to make miniatures as part of their practice. So for me, this is like the grounding section with a lot of works from 19th, 20th, and even 21st century. So I'll start with these two. These are both made by local artists. Katarina Buren is based in Cambridge, and Eben Haynes is based in Boston. It's actually a former MFA employee. Katarina's work is the architectural model, the Hotel Nord Sud. This was made over, it was part of a series that she made over a period of just about a decade, where she created a fake female architect called P.A. Molnar and created an entire fake body of work for her, including this model for the unrealized Hotel Nord Sud. She also made furniture for the Hotel Nord Sud and linens and stationery. She created this entire persona for a person who didn't exist. And essentially what she's doing is using miniature making as a way of acting as a kind of corrective history by putting women in the history of modern architecture in the 20th century. And I love that that's miniaturization as a way of achieving something you can't achieve in full size. Katarina Buren cannot go build an entire hotel in Czechoslovakia, but she can make a model of it. And also similarly, Eben Haynes's work here from 2020 called Shelter in Place Gallery, which may be known to some of you. It received quite a lot of press during the early months of the pandemic. But Eben created this when he lost access to his studio space and he had to work in his own living room. It's a model of a gallery, and he would have artists send him scaled works of art she would display in the gallery and then photograph and put online. So there was the illusion that it was a full-size gallery, and he felt he was really offering artists an opportunity to still produce works, maybe even sell them, participate in their commercial business at a time when commercial galleries were closed. These two objects are together in a case. The large object is about 6 inches tall. It's a Chinese porcelain rooster in our collection. And back in 2017, another local artist, Chris Templeman, came and asked if he could 3D scan it so that he could print them in a 3D printing vending machine on the Greenway in Boston. And about 2,000 of these little roosters were vended from this machine. They were highly sought after. People would wait for hours for them. But luckily one came to us and we were able to show them together, which is a treat. And then, as we said, something that's great about this exhibition is being able to bring together really, really different types of objects into the same spaces. This is a really wonderful example of a model for a bus. It's not a toy, though the wheels do roll. This would have been in a Greyhound store so that people could see what the bus they were booking themselves on would have been like. And this model, the Cena Cruiser, is specifically about this kind of raised upper level so that you're getting this vista. And seeing it in model form, I think you can see at a glance, it would be a comfortable ride. So anyone in the mid-1950s would have known by looking at this model that they would be having a very nice vacation. So next section is small size, big style. So this section is the other one that you encounter probably first from the other direction if you're coming into the gallery. And for me, this section is doing two things thematically. It's looking both at objects that are small as a way of becoming portable for showing your own fashion or something about yourself, your identity. But it's also about techniques of small objects, the small materials. I'm thinking seed pearl, for instance, micro mosaic, and this tiny, tiny glass work that's really, really intricate. And often miniatures require more technical skill to make than full-size works, even though they use less materials, but you may need to wear eyeglasses, you may need to have special tools. So there's really a lot of virtuosity of different types on view in the exhibition. So these two objects are in a case together, and I think they're a really lovely example of the kinds of pairings we can do with our amazing collection that spans such breadth. You may recognize the bicycle brooch from the promotional materials for the exhibition. This was made in the mid-1890s at the time when bicycles were becoming more popular. And specifically, they were becoming more popular with women who may even been able to ride them with pants on, and they allowed them more independence within the city. And so a woman who might have worn this brooch on her clothing, it would have been showing fashion. It's very stylish. It has diamonds, it has rubies, it's made of gold. But she might also have been making a bit of a political statement about women's independence and the right to vote. So it's playing two roles. And this is one of the objects in the exhibition that actually has motion to it, which is not something we can capture in a still image, but we did find a way around that. And Louisa will talk a little bit about that later on. And then the object on the other side by Hidesima, the clamshell. This is a netsuke. So those are the little beads that are used for holding the inro box as part of Japanese traditional dress. Originally, they started out as just a simple plain bead, but over time they became more and more elaborate and turning into almost entire scenes in and of themselves. And this one is doubly miniature. It's a miniature clamshell, which you can see at the top and bottom. And then it has this scene where the ivory is stained with ink to create this detailing. And it's showing a scene from the life of a poet, Ono no Komachi, who is sort of washing a book in this basin in front of her. These two objects, again, are very, very different in date, but quite close in size. They're both about 2.5 inches tall. And these came together when we were doing our layout of our cases, because I realized they're both about senses beyond touch and beyond sight. So they're not just art objects, but they're things that have another sense involved in them. The English gilded pomander on the left, it unscrews and opens and folds down like petals to reveal individual little drawers that have herbs or spices in them. So someone going about the Tudor city would have perhaps had this at their waist and been able to smell these smells, maybe even take some of it as medicine. So it was kind of like the kitchen garden and the apothecary all wrapped up into one beautiful portable object. And then the Jesus Soto ring here, made by the Venezuelan artist in the 1960s. It relates to full-size works by him, where you actually walk through with your body and animate them. But here you create the animation and the movement, and also the sound of the kind of tinkling of the metal against each other. You create that motion with your finger in space. So I love that parallel between his different elements of his practice. And here's the full-size example there. So you can imagine your body going through that space and then doing the same thing with the ring as well. So moving on to one of the side sections, this is called Magic, Mystery, and Memory. And it looks at primarily religious objects from a variety of different religions and cultures, and looks at how objects can be shrunk down, and that contributes to a kind of making them powerful, how objects can contain power within them. This object, I call it my poster child for Luisa's casework. This little amulet is so small. It's about 5 centimeters tall. And when you see it in a photo, it looks monumental. But if we installed it in a case with lots of other objects, it would get lost. But Luisa created this beautifully perfectly scaled, tall, thin case so that it can stand really in all of its power. I think it just is so well served by the way we've been able to display it in this context. This is the object that I mentioned at the beginning from the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. For me, this type of object, there are about 100 of them surviving in the world. This type of object was critical for telling a story about miniatures and about virtuosity. I'm showing it in 2 ways here, the open version of the bead and then the closed version. It's about the size of maybe like a walnut. It's really small. It fits beautifully into the palm of your hand. And these are prayer beads, so meant to be hung maybe from your waist. And the idea here is that you open the prayer bead and you meditate upon these scenes here, scenes of St. James and St. George, and you become so engrossed by the miniature that you kind of move into a meditative, prayerful state. They're made of a material called boxwood, which is very, very fine and takes carving quite well. And you can't maybe see it so well in the image, but see it in the exhibition. The sword of George into the mouth of the dragon is actually undercut. It's carved underneath, which is incredible. And at the time in the early 16th century, boxwood was believed to be the wood for the cross of Christ. So there was an important religious and spiritual connotation as well. And these beads were the specialty of a workshop in the Netherlands of Adam Dirks, really only for about 25 to 30 years. And in the case in the exhibition, it's paired with this absolutely gorgeous engraving by Dürer of the Crucifixion, where I think you get that curving of the figures in from the sides, but playing along with the circular form of the engraving. It's a really, really beautiful pairing. These 2 objects are part of a section on mourning jewelry or jewelry related to grief in some way. The one is American and the other is Central European, probably German. But in both instances, what they're doing, one is a brooch and the other is a ring. They are giving the wearer, the person in grief, an ability to take with them the site of burial, the grave site. In the Roland Perry example here, it has the inscription on the tombstones, the initials of the children of this mother. Their names are on the reverse side, along with some of their hair, and it said "not lost but gone before." And then the German example says, I wait for the time when we can be together. So very poignant and very personal objects that you would carry with you, but you could in some ways sort of perform your grief and even process it in some ways as well. Next section is people and animals. As I said, we really felt like this exhibition had to be fun. It's also making a point about how miniatures should be taken seriously. They're not always just for children or for toys, but people and animals allowed us a chance to get a little bit of have a little bit of fun with it as well. things in the exhibition. The scaraboid of a hedgehog is the smallest object in the exhibition. It's probably tied for the oldest as well. Those dimensions are correct. It's 1 by 1.5 centimeters large. And each of those individual quills really denoted on the back of it. It's made of a material called faience, which is a kind of glass-like ceramic material that always has this characteristic blue. And hedgehogs are in Egyptian culture thought to be emblematic of life and rebirth and death, because they bury under the ground and then they come back up. So they kind of are reincarnated. So they're a common thing to be depicted in scaraboids and in Egyptian art as well. And then this on the right, from Kyoto, the hare and mushroom, it's another netsuke, that same bead that I mentioned for the counterweight for the in-row box. And this, I love the way the ivory is so beautifully stained with the little bit of ink, the detailing on his eye, and how protective he is of his little mushroom there. It has a really smooth quality to it. You can imagine that the owner must have manipulated it with their hands, and it would have had such a beautiful feeling to it as well. And you could see the kind of like almost oily quality to the ivory because of that hand manipulation that's happened over the years. And here they are together. You can see the hedgehog in the background, and then the ivory netsuke, and then another little wooden netsuke of a monkey who's holding a little bunch of fruits. And then next to them, which I really love, is the Balletta bulldog. This was made by Fabergé, the workshop famous for the Fabergé eggs. It's a specific dog. It belonged to a ballerina who lived in Paris. We know where the dog lived. If you saw this dog walking down the street, you would recognize him. It's such a faithful likeness. He's about maybe 2.5, 3 inches tall. And in most contexts, he would look small, but here with these other animals, he's the biggest one of the bunch. And I just love the way we can play with scale in that way, by putting objects together that have never been together before. As I mentioned, I'm a decorative arts person, so I think in 3 dimensions. But I had wonderful colleagues who volunteered all sorts of excellent objects for the exhibition. People would come up and say, I've got the perfect tiny object. It never goes on view in the galleries because it's so small. Will it work for your exhibition? And these are 2 of those objects. They usually live in very large gold frames. And in this exhibition, we really wanted to unframe quite a few of the paintings and sort of liberate them from those frames. For the Jewish man reading in particular, the frame overhung it so much that you couldn't see the inscription, you could hardly see any of the detailing. So we instead decided to take them out of their frames and then have these very, very minimalist clips made for them, which are made by our amazing colleagues, the mount makers, Brett Angel and Kim McParland, which then allows the paintings to be like objects and have us focus on their scale more closely and not be distracted by the frame. And these objects, they're both French, from about 10 years apart, really, one by Millet and one by Brandon. And I think they have a beautiful contemplative quality together. And they look lovely on this blue color wall. I think it serves them both really well. So next up is miniatures at home. And for me, as I mentioned, a lot of people associate miniatures with dolls and with children and with toys, and that is true to a certain extent. But I really wanted people to walk away from the exhibition knowing that there's more to miniatures than that. If we think back to Katarina Buren and her model as a way of correcting histories, there's a lot you can do with it, and you can be really serious with miniatures. So I wanted to address that head on by having a section of miniatures for the home and have them not be objects for dolls or toys. So that's what this section is doing. And this object, I think, is really wonderful. You can see it in the previous slide. It's actually quite large. It's one of the objects of scale in the exhibition. And again, when Louisa showed her slide with all of the objects on it, there's such a variety in scales. There's an object that's about 5 feet tall, all the way down to that one that's 1.5 centimeters tall, because miniatures don't have to be small. They just have to be smaller than their parent object. And this object is, it's a miniature stove, so smaller than the stoves that we would have at home. But it's a salesperson sample. So if you can see on the sides alongside the linoleum, there's little clips. It would get a lid that goes over the top and a handle, and it just turns almost into like a piece of luggage. And a salesperson from the wrought iron range company in St. Louis would have taken this around to people's houses to show it to them. It's easier than getting people to come to a store, and then they can also see it in the comfort of their own home and imagine it in their remodeled kitchen. It actually connects up to gas, and the dials work, and it would function as a full-on miniature stove. So very much not a child's object, a really deeply practical object for whomever was making their living by taking this around the Midwest. And this had been on loan to us for quite a number of years, but never had a chance to come out on view. So this exhibition was a perfect time to bring it out into the light. This is a really, really wonderful object that I'm very grateful to my colleagues in the Art of the Americas department for lending across the building. It's usually on view in their galleries. This is a chair. It's about 7 inches tall. It is a model, a patent model for a library step chair. And you can see in the patent drawing that it unclips and folds, and so the chair, the seat, flips upside down and becomes steps for climbing up to get a book to then read in your library chair. And Augustus Eliers was an American artist, designer, entrepreneur who developed this and then other sort of mechanical design objects. He designed a kind of chair for convalescents. And as part of the patent application, he had to submit this miniature chair to show how the mechanism worked and to show what was unique about it. And this is the actual chair that he submitted. We have a few full-size examples in the collection too, which is really fun. And it became a very popular model that I'm sure made him some money off of the patent. This is one of 2 miniature baskets in the exhibition. This is quite small. It's only about 2 inches tall. Relatively recent acquisition from 2012 that had never been on view. It's by Fanny Williams from the Nuu-chah-nulth community in the Pacific Northwest of Canada. And it's a miniature basket with kind of animal, bird, maybe bat designs along it, made with woven reeds or grass that had been dyed. And this was probably made for the tourist trade in the 1990s, but it reflects baskets that were traditionally used within the Nuu-chah-nulth community, which is quite interesting to think about whether tourists actually know that the miniatures relate to full-size examples and whether that's of note. Is that something that appeals when tourists are buying it, or they just want something to take home with them? So it raises some interesting questions about the role of miniatures. And Louisa showed a couple of her kind of cutout images. This is a really lovely one where you get those 2 different experiences. In the exhibition, we do a lot of this mixing of different cultures together in cases, but then occasionally it's to be very, very strict with our time and our place. So all of the objects in this case are, mid-century modern, essentially. We've got the Philip Stark chair and its little packing material, a Noguchi table, and then here in the background, you may recognize the famous Andy Warhol image, but it's actually made by the artist Richard Pettibone, who's still active today. He's still living. He practices something called appropriative art, where he takes famous imagery, maybe from advertising or other artists, and then he makes it his own. So he's taken Andy Warhol's tomato soup cans and shrunk it down. And he even went so far as to make this little structure at the back. So that's why Louisa's design really draws attention to that and allows us to focus in on it. And again, our mount makers made this beautiful mount that holds it perfectly steady, but really allows you to see the beauty of the structure that Pettibone made as well. And now on to our last section, miniatures in the world. This section, as we showed in the design, it's kind of part of a whole with miniatures in the miniatures at home, and it was very easy to pick the color for this one. Green made a lot of sense because, I think you can probably see in the image, and we'll look a little bit more in depth. The section combines landscape drawings and paintings, primarily French and Dutch. It combines those with objects that are sort of about how we can order the world around us and how we can understand the world around us. So those are the two types of things that are within this last section. This was a fun pairing of objects to put together. This is another work by Fabergé. There are 3 in the exhibition. He really liked to work in miniature. This is a spray of lilies of the valley, which are made of glass and enamel, and then the base of it is made with rock crystal, so that it appears as like water. And the beauty of these flowers is they never die. They're always in bloom, in perfect bloom. And so these work beautifully in a case with the hokusai print of the bonsai grower who's selling all of the miniature trees, which, again, that kind of an idea that you can sort of possess nature by tending to these bonsai trees and making them almost more perfect than they would be in nature, and not having them die in any way, and sort of cultivating them and keeping them going. So these go together in a case, and it's a really fun pairing. Here are examples, as I mentioned, of French in the drawing, the sketch of how paintings should be hung. This is Corot showing works that look like Corot's. He's probably describing to someone how to hang his works at an exhibition. And this work is really quite small. It's 4 by 3 inches. So each of the miniature works within that are only maybe an inch or an inch and a half big. But I really love how instantly recognizable the style of him as a landscape artist is. You've got these puffy trees and like slightly highlighted figures. It's really beautiful. And we paired that with 2 small works by him, so you can kind of imagine them together. And then on the right, Willem de Hooch, he is a Dutch artist born in Utrecht who travels to Italy and is inspired by the landscapes that he sees in Italy. And here he's made 8 miniature landscape drawings, landscape paintings in oil. They're really small. They're like the size of a stick of gum, but each one has an individual signature on it, and they're all slightly different from each other. So they're kind of variations on theme, and they're quite finished. So I don't think they were preparatory for anything. I wonder whether maybe they were set into a box or some type of furniture in some way. I'm not exactly sure. But this is on loan to us graciously from the Maida and George Abrams collection that's based locally. So it's really wonderful to have that in the exhibition. And then these 3 objects are the ones that I mentioned are about ordering the world around us and understanding the world around us. At the far left, the globe compass made around 1680. It's made of ivory, and then it has staining of ink on the outside. It's terrestrial, so it's showing, you know, drop of Cancer, drop of Capricorn. It's showing the mapping of the world. And if you held it in your hand, you'd feel like you were possessing the world in your hand. But it, even adding more onto it, it unscrews, and on the inside is a compass. So someone who owns this both can imagine that they hold the world in the palm of their hand, but they also have the means by which to navigate around it. They know how to actually physically command the world, which I think is a really, really interesting combination of things. At the center is a miniature magnifying glass. This had been in our collection since the 1920s, but had never been on view before. It's actually to be hung from your wrist as a kind of bracelet. And the idea here is that after the invention of the microscope in the late 17th century, there's kind of an explosion in an interest in seeing the microscopic. Now, you know, a piece of pond water has thousands of tiny insects in it, or what does the air have in it as well? So here someone could be out in the world, a Victorian person, they could encounter a little bug or insect and look at it through their magnifying glass anywhere they were. And then the last object here on this slide is the girdle book calendar at the right. It's probably Spanish or French from about 1300. It's so fragile. It's ink on parchment. It just sits like this. But it has, it's like an almanac in some ways and a calendar. It covers the months from March to December and talks about what the weather might have been like, astronomical and astrological occurrences. So someone who would have had this and had it hanging from their waist or their girdle would have really known a lot about the world and been able to share that information with people as they encountered them. So really powerful objects to have. And I will hand back over to Louisa to tell you a little bit more about how we brought some of these objects to life.
And so Courtney already hinted at this throughout the presentation, but we had this projection in the space to kind of, a lot of the objects do have motion in them. For example, the compass in itself, or the pomander that Courtney mentioned, or the bicycle. And also a lot of the objects have really small details that, due to the tininess of the objects, you really couldn't see. And so pretty early on, we decided to have a projection in the space that would allow these objects to be blown up and to show their motion as well, where there was motion. And the layout of the projection responds also directly to our rooms, in that the two side kind of panels relate to the size of the rooms themselves, and the central one relates to that center aisle. And so as you go through this aisle, you can already see the projection at the end, and it almost draws you through. And we built a little bench for it so you could enjoy it for a longer period of time. And here you can really see how the objects are much larger in the room than they are as objects. And yeah, so in relation to the room, the projection sits on this wall, and you can pretty much see it from wherever you are in the room. So, and the projection itself also refers back to the rooms through their background colors. So if you see an object you like, you can go back to the room and look at it in real life.
And we just wanted to show you some of the behind the scenes of the exhibition. It was really fun to work on with so many colleagues. As I mentioned, nearly every curatorial department was involved, which means there's a curator in the room for almost all the objects. And we worked with our mount makers. You can see with the tomato soup can, that is our mount maker, Brett, putting that in. And then also conservators from nearly every one of our conservation labs, because we had textiles, works on paper, Asian works on paper, furniture, frames, paintings. It really, really was a major cross-departmental project. And you can also see the carpenters working hard. Louisa's design, as she said, no case was the same size, which is a challenge for the carpenters. They had to look at her drawings intently and make sure that everything fit. But as we said multiple times, we really just wanted to give these objects their moment and give them the best possible space that we could. And I think the design does that, and so many colleagues really helped us achieve that. And so just to conclude, the exhibition is on view until February 11th. So there's just about 2 more months to see it. And we hope that you will come and enjoy it. I refer to Kimberly, who I think will help take us through some questions, if there are any.
Thanks so much, Courtney and Louisa. That was great. And yes, we do have some questions. The first is, did you consider putting some of the miniature paintings in the miniature gallery? A person with whom I visited the exhibit wished that we could have seen how a painting in the gallery looked.
Yes, we did. The Shelter in Place gallery was on view in an earlier exhibition called New Light from 2021 to 2022, and it was installed with some miniature works of art. When the museum acquired Shelter in Place Gallery in 2021, we acquired 2 works by artists who had shown in the gallery during the pandemic. But once an object enters the museum's collection, our care for it becomes a bit more stringent, and our objects conservators have limited types of materials that we can display in it. We can't, for instance, put any metal because it might interact with the materials that the gallery is made from. So that does limit us slightly. So for this exhibition, because it had previously had works in it, I sort of was thinking it would just stand on its own as a kind of tribute to Eben's work, but I do agree. And I think you can see some images of it online, hopefully.
Thank you. Patricia asks about the pomander. Is it displayed open or closed? And it would be fascinating to see the sections you described.
Yeah, it's displayed in the exhibition in the case closed because pomander refers to palm or apple. So I really wanted people to see that form. But the video shows it being opened, and it shows me sliding the drawers open and shows all of the individual petals with the different names of the spices. So I think it's cedar and lavender and rose. If you watch the video, and the video is online as well. And we just posted it on Instagram and Facebook just last week. So if you want to know more about the pomander, its close-up is there.
Thank you. And Kelly wonders, how did you find all these miniatures in the first place? Do you put out a design brief call for miniatures to various museums and collectors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I said, my specialty is European decorative art. So I'm sure, as you saw through the presentation, a lot of the works come from that part of the collection. But then as the exhibition was getting a little bit more momentum, I would meet with different curators and different colleagues around the building and tell them what I was thinking about working on and say, what do you have in your collection that might fit? And I found that a lot of people had objects that they were really excited to bring to me. Because, for instance, let's go back to that Millet painting of the woman, the woman daydreaming. My colleague Katie Hansen, who's in charge of our 19th century galleries, they're huge, big, grand galleries. She can't show a painting that's that small. So a lot of people had objects that they had wanted to get out on view that they thought were great objects, and they'd never had the right context. And I think what Louisa and I have been able to do here is create the context that allows these objects to shine.
Thank you. Let's see. Steph says that she loved the exhibit. 100+ objects were chosen to display. Approximately how many did you pass up and decide not to display? Any that you passed up that you can describe that perhaps didn't fit thematically but were equally amazing?
It's a great question. There were some things that actually fell out at an early point. Originally, I had been thinking that the exhibition would be focused primarily on small things, but a colleague of mine, Laura Weinstein, said, no, really focus on miniatures. And so some things that were just small, but not really miniatures, fell out at that point. That was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And we kind of really focused in on this idea of the miniature. So I'd say maybe, I don't know, 30 to 40 objects came my way that I passed up.
Nice. One of our attendees says that the girdle book looks to me a little bit like an umbrella. How would one read all of the pages?
With difficulty and probably some sort of lens. I'm not sure that it actually would have been used that much. And at this point, it's really, the parchment is really brittle. So we never even move the pages. I don't know if you go to the exhibition, you'll see that it's on a special little cardboard base, and our paper conservators just lift the cardboard base, put it in the display case, and then lift it out. So we never even touch the object anymore. But I think it probably would have been very difficult to actually use at the time.
James wonders, what is the history of interest in miniature objects? When and why did we develop the focus on miniatures?
That's a great question. And I think it's what this exhibition is trying to answer. I think it's always been there. If we look at the fact that these objects, at least by my search, go back to 700 BC and continue to this day. I do think there are kind of specific moments when they have a resurgence. I think really during the age of exploration, when the world is expanding around you, and you've certainly Europeans thought they were encountering new lands. It's not necessarily the case, but as the world is expanding around you, you might want to become more insular and start thinking more in miniature. And that's kind of maybe 1500, 1600. And then when you get to around 1700, the invention of the microscope is a huge change. a big change in the scientific community, but it also had a ripple-on effect throughout society. So that's a kind of spike of interest in miniatures. The Victorians also really liked things like fairies and ghosts and miniatures and things like that. So there's a bit of a moment there. And then I would say the moment we're living in. I think once computers shrink down to be able to be in our pockets, we have to start thinking about scale and size in a different way. And off the back of 20th century land art and immersive installations like Yayoi Kusama infinity rooms, a lot of artists are kind of turning the other way and working in miniature in a kind of contrast to that. So I think it's always been there bubbling under the surface, and it kind of spikes up at different points.
Thank you. Louise wants you to know that she thought this was a most interesting exhibit and says thank you. And Bev is wondering whether the collection search feature on our website, whether or not you can search by size of object.
You cannot. I have tried. When I was doing my searches, I would look for things like tiny, small, miniature, and that's how a lot of things came out. But no, you can't search by, you can't, there's a search function for like dates between this range, but there's not, you know, sizes between 1 and 2 inches. Unfortunately, we can't do that. I'll tell our TMS, our database administrator, that we should put that in though.
One of our colleagues says, bravo for this exhibition. In my nearly 40 years working at the MFA, I've seldom seen anything so remarkable, which seems like a great comment to end our evening on. So once again, thank you, Courtney and Louisa, for joining us. And thanks everyone who joined us tonight for this terrific lecture. Thanks and have a good night.